You have exactly 3 seconds to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, I'll appear in your dreams tonight. To ask for a donation for that cup of coffee, link below.
For over a decade, under Xi Jinping, China has aggressively invested billions of dollars to modernize its military, all for one sole purpose: to ascend to the status of a military superpower and compete with the world's most powerful nation at the present time, the United States. Therefore, scholars and the international community, the risk of war between these two powers is not. In fact, such a scenario has garnered considerable attention and has been extensively analyzed. Therefore, in today's video, military knowledge will present to you our predicted scenario of a US-China war. Her music. Her music. Before we delve into the main content, let's create a great experience by liking and subscribing so you don't miss any new videos from the Military Knowledge channel. Let's share and discover useful and equally interesting knowledge about the military field through your small screen. Now, let's start the music. Before the war, China's top leaders are meeting in Beijing to assess the current situation. They possess approximately 500 nuclear warheads, a large with 70-30 ships of various types, an air force with over 3, and a standing army of over 2 million people, more than any other country in the world. However, relying solely on firepower is not enough to confront the United States. The People's Liberation Army of China will need a more effective strategy to ensure victory against the world's #1 military superpower. They must carefully organize and coordinate attacks throughout the Pacific. The reason is that the United States maintains a very active military presence in the region, with over 190 bases in South Korea and Japan alone. Furthermore, the U.S. Navy, despite its smallest, possesses superior firepower and combat experience compared to China, making it impossible to predict the outcome. Any direct attack on the United States, without careful planning or preparation, would be suicidal. Therefore, the prerequisite for launching a war is gaining control of the Pacific Ocean. However, they will not do this with missiles, aircraft, or instead, the first front will be opened in. For many years, China has been researching technology that allows it to infiltrate U.S. military infrastructure and defense systems to limit Washington's ability to respond to an attack. Since a Chinese cyber attack group has carried out cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure at the beginning of the war and in several other places in the United States. Observations show that the intention of this cyber attack group was to conduct espionage and maintain access while avoiding detection for as long as possible. By December, the FBI had disabled infiltrating devices and stopped the attacks. Chinese hackers reconnected to malicious networks. However, this will not stop Beijing from continuing its efforts. Upon receiving orders, Chinese cyber attack will carry out dozens of massive cyber attacks targeting U.S. water, power, and communication systems, particularly focusing on systems near critical military facilities. Furthermore, hackers will continue to target the networks of companies providing critical services to the U.S. military, as well as the transportation systems and methods the U.S. uses to deliver aid to Taiwan should China decide to send troops across the strait. In Beijing's eyes, Taiwan is not only a rebellious territory that needs to be, but also the weakest link in the entire first island chain. If they want to break through the seal, reach Pacific, and open a path to attack US territory, capturing Taiwan is a must. The first day, the first hour, the entire US is in turmoil. This is not unfamiliar. What's with the news that China is giving away its weapons? Even successfully countered rocket attacks before, but they've never faced a cyber attack on such a massive scale. Public transport systems like railways and energy pipelines have all become targets. While the Americans are tracking down the perpetrator, China has had the opportunity and time to begin the next phase of its attack. With the nod of the chairman of the Central Military Commission, the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force immediately deployed short-range missiles in conjunction with 16 sortie squadrons from Longshan and Hine bases to attack Taiwan. Meanwhile, more powerful offensives will be concentrated on the US Pacific, with approximately 200 ships and 150,000 military and civilian personnel. This force possesses the capability to control half the Earth's surface from the South Pole to the Arctic Circle and from the West Coast. The US move to India can therefore be considered the biggest obstacle, hindering Beijing's ambitions to attack the US. Of course, with its current strength, China is not capable of destroying the entire Pacific Fleet. Therefore, a more feasible plan is to strategically weaken this force in the first hours of a war, to eliminate the US's ability to react quickly. To do that, China needs launch a missile attack, targeting 3 primary groups of targets: the naval bases the US has established in Japan and South Korea. This would be a very risk. Any missile attack on these countries would certainly cause unintended and significant damage, enough to force both countries, which are US allies and have some degree of animosity towards China, to join the war against a common enemy. However, not attacking would mean that nearly 200 US military bases with 1,000 troops would be at risk. Launching an immediate counterattack is unacceptable to Beijing, as it would take such a huge. Therefore, Dongfeng 26 missiles will be launched at US bases in Japan and the Netherlands, each with allies, easily ensuring they can reach their targets. However, not all Dongfeng 26 will be deployed. They will be interspersed with shorter range missiles, such as the Dongfeng 16, simply because the government needs to conserve long-range missiles for more distant targets. Specific, those missiles will participate in the attack targeting Andersen Air Force Base and the naval base. In addition, China will also launch its newest and most modern weapon in its arsenal, Dong 27, to attack the Netherlands. All of these will form a second group of targets, the Dongfeng 27 missile, designed to enhance the government's ability to intercept dangerous targets beyond the second island chain, and has a high potential to penetrate the defense system. The US ballistic missiles, with their supersonic speed, long range, and high maneuverability, will be the primary weapon China will use to bombard the North American mainland. The third target group will be US warships present in the Pacific, especially those equipped with heavy weaponry and powerful air defense systems that China hopes to eliminate or severely damage. In reality, the number of cruisers and destroyers near the mainland coast runs into the dozens, and China knows it cannot destroy them all. However, the more US warships that China can disable, the easier it will be for the subsequent landing on Taiwan and attack on US territory. However, if Beijing's plan goes smooth, there's nothing to worry about. Although Chinese cyber attacks have caused difficulties for the US, the US missile defense systems will not be. Instead, satellites belonging to the program will be compromised. The US Space Force's defensive capabilities will easily detect Chinese missile launches, giving the president time to organize national defense. The first measure will be to deploy ground-launched interceptor missiles (GBI), with 44 operational systems currently deployed at Fort Greene in Alaska and VBG Air Force Base from both locations. GBI is responsible for protecting Hawaii and serves as the first line of defense for the United States against Chinese missile attacks across the Pacific. Beijing will monitor and await its first barrage of missiles aimed at targets in South. And with its massive missile arsenal, the defenses of U.S. bases, home U.S. troops will be overwhelmed. Okinawa be the primary target of these attacks, with missiles raining down on F-15 Eagle fighter jets and early warning and control aircraft without E-3 C-135 staff. Tanker. The Chinese missile attack could be considered an initial victory, having killed thousands of American soldiers. However, Beijing understands that U.S. bases will not be completely shut down. At this, the PLA cannot conduct ground attack, meaning U.S. will not be able to rebuild its bases and replenish its forces quickly enough to continue playing the role of a forward force in the war against China. However, this is not a simple task that can be completed in a day or two, taking advantage of the time when U.S. aircraft are not controlling the skies and providing air support. The PLA will direct missiles at U.S. cruisers, destroyers present in the Pacific. Unlike military bases, warships are much smaller and more maneuverable targets, making them not easy to hit. However, China possesses many. The sheer number of missiles, a testament to their quality, meant that China could sink about half of the U.S. cruisers and several dozen destroyers within minutes of China's Dongfeng 27 missiles approaching Hawaii. GBI systems from California and Alaska could fire dozens of missiles in the sky, but no matter how advanced they were, they couldn't cover the entire area. Therefore, many Chinese missiles successfully penetrated the air defenses and struck several important targets. Beijing even hoped to destroy at least a few submarines based. However, that wouldn't have happened without warning from bases in Japan, South, or even from the very beginning of the Cyber Night, ordered its submarines to dive to avoid enemy missiles until the U.S. was ready for. Overall, on the first day of the conflict, China used nearly a quarter of its false. China's missiles could devastate U.S. bases in Asia, albeit cost of drawing Japan and South Korea into a conflict. The U.S. Pacific Fleet has been weakened. Along with that, cyber attacks have also limited the speed at which the U.S. can respond to Beijing's next move. While it's difficult to say that China has been completely successful in opening the South China Sea for now, that's enough. After buying time with attacks on the U.S. temporary, Beijing can now its immediate main target, Taiwan. As mentioned above, China used short-range missiles in combination with fighter jets to destroy several targets, including smaller islands surrounding Taiwan. However, they will face an air defense network composed of the U.S. Patriot system, Taiwan's domestically produced Tiangong surface-to-air ballistic missiles. After 24 hours of preemptive strikes, the Chinese will cross the sea to begin the. At this point, a problem arises in the attempt to seize the island. They have very few viable attack options, besides natural factors such as unstable weather and a lack of suitable beaches. The Taiwanese have long developed a deep and effective defense plan to counter a full-scale attack from the mainland. As soon as the missiles begin to fly, Taipei will send strong orders to defensive positions on both sides of the island. Taiwan, benefiting from its possession of rugged, forested mountain ranges, will deploy missiles, artillery, and intercept anything attempting to approach. The roads built through the cliffs leading to the mainland will be destroyed, thus turning the plains and open coastline to the west into the only viable approach point. In the air, Taiwan will establish an extremely strict defense system, exposing any soldier, aircraft that sets foot on the sand to the overwhelming firepower This comes from anti-armor weapons and artillery. Not to mention that when the tide recedes, the beaches will turn into long stretches of mud, slowing down the advance of the overwhelming Chinese army. The PLA will cross the coast to enter the cities. The Taiwanese will use the system of caves, shelters, and tunnels through the mountains stretching across the island to inflict casualties and create chaos for the enemy. Thanks to these, can wage guerrilla warfare against the PLA, making the enemy experience a nightmare of a war of attrition, gradually exhausting them both, physically and mentally. This is precisely very bad news